As you probably know, I am Melly, and thanks, Kevin. And I'm here tonight with Marcus Reed, who is a fantastic participant in our program. He's an attorney, and he specializes in um, alcohol law.
Alcohol law.
Alcohol law.
Yep.
We love that. So, and this is a good starting place for all of us, because when you want to start a business, what you need is someone who can give you the legal perspective, especially in the world of alcohol, which has a lot of legalities and really helps to get you ducks in a row from the beginning. I can speak from experience that I made some mistakes in the beginning that many people made, and you'll learn about some of those mistakes tonight when Marcus talks about some issues. And as a result, when I needed to have an exit strategy, I didn't benefit as much as I should have, and for conflict. So that's why we start with this topic. When you're thinking about your concept, when you're thinking about your strategy and where you want to go, it's very helpful to have thought these first basic steps out. Marcus reappears in the second class, 402, to talk about more advanced things that would apply to like your site and things like that. And then he's helping teach the last class, which is the legal, finance, and accounting class, which is awesome. He's always been a very popular presenter.
And very busy.
And very busy. Yes, unfortunately, he's really busy, and you know, we're lucky to have him. Still some people in the old conference.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I don't know how to get them out of there. I ended it, so. Okay, so we're going to get going, and luckily this is all recorded, so the people in the old conference will be able to find us, unless you have a way of communicating with them, Thomas, because I've turned off the old conference. I can't get into it. Right, so we're going to get started. I'm going to just talk to you about a few things that are going on in class. Everything happens on Canvas, as you've probably already seen. And we have the video lectures, and we have the cases where I've gone and interviewed people all over the world. You'll start to see some more international content as we move along. As I travel, I create new videos and add them. So there's a lot of, it's very relevant to everybody. The other thing you'll see is I have templates for doing your business plan that are very specific to the craft beverage world. And I have Excel workbooks that are kind of written in a baby step format. So for those of you who have never used Excel, we go through creating everything you need to know about pricing your beverage and figuring out what you're going to charge for it, and figuring out actually from the beverage itself what kind of income would come in. And then in the second class, we work at all the things you're going to have to pay for out of that income related to the overhead. So that's kind of how we've structured things. We have workbooks for Excel workbooks that are specific to beer and cider. Those can be done on the same one craft bev, which is the name of our Excel package. That can be done on that. The spirits have a slightly different workbook. If you're doing a distilled spirits, you need to use the one that's just for spirits, just because how the process works, the costing is quite a bit different. And then we also have both of the Excel workbooks are done in metric for those people who want to use metric, because we have people from around the world that would have to use hectoliters and units like that. So we tried to make it as versatile as possible. This is our third go around with this class, and I take the feedback from all the students and try to make this as relevant to all the students as possible, so they get a good working business plan. And then you'll find all the readings and other fun websites for referencing on the Canvas site. And there's a quiz after every section, as many people have seen. That just helps you stay kind of motivated, monitor your progress, and it really benefits everybody. So it's a big group typically, so we take all the questions typed in. That way we've been able to answer most of the questions.
Yeah, pretty much.
By having typed in questions. So And then if you need support on your spreadsheet, just contact me. And sometimes I do one-on-one sessions with people through Skype, and that, some people find it really easy, some people find it more challenging. And you'll find that if you need help going through spreadsheets, then just let me know and we'll schedule some time to work together. Okay? Now, let's hand it over to Marcus, since we spent a lot of time working on our technology issues. This is what Marcus is going to talk about today. So he can introduce himself, and I'll take a little backseat.
Okay, thank you, Melly. Like Melly said, I'm a business attorney. I'm a beer attorney, but I work with breweries, meaderies, cideries, distilleries, basically anybody who creates alcohol. I will work with them. This is a great town, Portland, Oregon, to be doing this business in, because I have been able to develop a really nice clientele just within the city of Portland, and then have also spread out to other areas of Pacific Northwest and outside of the Pacific Northwest, which is a rapidly growing part of my practice. As a business attorney, I am dealing with not just regulatory issues that arise in the alcohol industries, but business formation issues and business compliance issues, tax issues, structural issues, anything that comes within the life cycle of a business is the kind of thing that I deal with, and the kind of thing that your business attorney will deal with. And I hope you do hire one. And I hope you hire somebody who has some, if not specific expertise and experience in the industry, maybe at least some interest in the industry, because that way you're going to get somebody who's really looking out for your best interests, and somebody who's going to really, when you need an answer, they're going to be interested in knowing that answer as well. So look for somebody with some interest in the craft beverage industries. So the basic concepts we're going to talk about, as Melly said, these are concepts that they're broad concepts that are going to pop up as you come along in putting this business together. And they're extremely important concepts, things to have in the back of your mind as you get started up, and things you're going to have to put together at some point. So we'll talk about entity formation. We'll talk about the agreements that you're going to come up with between the owners of your company, if you're going to have multiple owners. We'll talk a little bit about securities law. We dive deeper into that into the 4.4 section, but because it is a really complicated area, but it is an important area to just keep your eye on to make sure you're not going askew of the securities laws. We'll talk a little bit about tax issues, and we'll talk about name protection and intellectual property issues, how to protect any intellectual property that you want to protect, and how to, very importantly, protect the name of your company and the labels as they come out. And then we'll talk about some alternative arrangements with contract brewing and alternating proprietorships. These are becoming more and more popular types of running a business, where maybe you don't want to invest in a full brewing facility and all the headaches that come along with that, but you can benefit from other companies' excess capacity. Oh, sure. Let's see, should the legal rep be local to your state, or does it not matter? The answer to that is you're going to need somebody who's local to that state for the local issues. There are going to be issues that come up that are very state oriented, such as the business formation issues. Every state has its own LLC and corporation statute. They're all pretty much the same, but they do vary somewhat. And for attorneys, especially, you're going to have some difficulty getting somebody who's not licensed in that state to even do some of this work, because a lot of states have rules that say your attorney has to be licensed in order to perform certain work in that state. That said, one arrangement that I do with some people is we have local counsel within their state to handle those sort of state-specific issues, and then I act as their beverage counsel to basically work on the more industry-specific issues, like distribution agreements, like licensing, TTB especially, the issues and trademarks, the issues that are sort of not centered on the state. So you can do it, but to have a full set of legal representation, you're going to need somebody within the state as well, or somebody licensed within that state at least. So let's dive into the entity type selection. The two basic ones, I'm sure you've heard of these, are the corporation, the LLC. The LLC is I would say by and large, the most utilized entity type in this industry. And there's a good reason for that. They're very flexible entities. They're easier to form generally. There are less formalities that you have to deal with. In some states, they're actually cheaper to form. And in most states, when you hire an attorney to do them, it's going to be a little bit cheaper to form an LLC than a corporation because the corporation just has more formalities involved with it. That said, the corporation, one thing that's nice about the corporation is it's sort of a package deal. You form a corporation, and most states have very strictly defined corporate laws, whereas LLCs are less defined. So you're getting the sort of package when you that the state provides when you form a corporation. Taxation is going to be one of the big things you look at in this. Talk to your CPA before you decide on entity type. And somebody here has asked if I'd recommend an S corp. And in most cases, if it's between a corporation, a C corporation, and an S corporation, we're in most cases going to recommend an S corp. The exception to that being, if you're looking at getting some kind of private equity funding, like some kind of group funding, you have maybe one of these private equity firms that's looking at throwing some money at you. They might require that you're a C corporation. So it really depends on what your plans are for investment. The benefit of an S corporation you're going to get is a tax benefit. That is, just in a nutshell, the fact that you can pay yourself as an employee, pay payroll taxes on your salary income, your W-2 income, and then pay the rest of your income as a dividend, a corporate dividend, which you're not going to pay those employment taxes on. Obviously, that's not going to come into play until you're actually making a profit, and as I'm sure you'll learn throughout this course, that's probably not going to happen right away. So the S Corp question is something that I see come up in about year 3 or 4 of a brewery's life, when some folks start looking at converting from an LLC to an S Corp. You can also be an LLC and elect to be taxed as an S Corp, which is a nice option for a lot of people. You end up getting the flexibility of the LLC, the flexibility to have these operating agreements that allow you to run your company exactly the way you want to run it instead of how the corporate law defines it. But you get the S Corp tax treatment. It works really well for a lot of entities. For most folks, and I was actually just going to get to this question about whether it's worth it to start out as an S Corp first and then instead of switching over later on. In some cases, if you're going to be an operating entity and you know that you're going to have profits, or you assume you're going to have profits within 3 or 4 years, it might be worth it to start out as an S Corp. That's a question for your CPA. It's sort of a balancing between the additional costs of startup for an S Corp, whether you want to be managed as a corporation, and when you're expecting that benefit of the S Corp to come into play. Another thing you have to look at is your investment scheme. In some companies, if you're having a lot of passive investors come in and maybe you have different people paying different amounts for their ownership, things like that, the S Corp just may not make sense, and you're going to require that flexibility of the LLC, and that's why a lot of people end up doing this. A lot of folks starting up beverage companies will put in a very small amount of their own money, if anything, if they put in their own capital, and they'll go out and find investors and bank loans for the rest. And there are going to be some situations where that corporate formation, that corporate entity isn't going to serve that structure very well.
There was one question. Is the internet trustworthy enough to search for a lawyer or attorney familiar with brewing laws, or is there a better way?
I think that's a good question. I think the internet is a decent place to look. I think the better place is your local Brewers Guild. If you can find an attorney who is an associate member of your Brewers Guild, assuming they have associate members, that's a great place to start. Those people are obviously invested in the industry. Another place might be the Brewers Association. A lot of attorneys are members of the BA, myself included. You might be able to find counsel through there by running a search on their membership that's within your state. Also, just ask the brewers, who are they working with? Ask other brewers in your area, producers in your area, who they're working with. And if they like their attorney, check them out. It might be somebody you'd like to work with as well. I'd say probably most of my business comes from referrals, which is the greatest greatest place to get business from, because that means your clients are actually appreciating your work and referring you to other people. And it also means that that when you go to somebody, if you get that referral and you go to somebody, you can have this kind of instant trust in that person because they've treated somebody else well. Name availability, we're going to talk more about that on a future slide, but for this purpose, when you're choosing your entity, you just want to make sure that that name is available in your state. So you're going to do a search through your Secretary of State Corporation search, see if it's available. If it's not available, then you should definitely be looking at a different name, because that may also cause you some trademark headaches in the future. You're going to want to register that company with the state, and each state has its own sort of registration process. In Oregon, for instance, if you're going to register an LLC, you file what are called Articles of Organization. If you're going to file a corporation, it's called Articles of Incorporation, similar names in a lot of the states. In general, they're very simple forms. It's just a way of showing who you are to the state. They're not going to ask you a whole lot of questions about your business. It's just going to be primarily, who do we contact if somebody needs to get to your business. So you're going to list your principal place of business, and you're going to list a registered agent, which is somebody who can accept basically the service of lawsuits or other notices from government agencies. That's all the state really cares about. And for most LLC statutes, once you file that LLC within the state, you are an LLC. That's all you have to do to technically be an LLC. As we'll talk about later, there's more than you should do, but that's all you absolutely have to do. For corporations, there are typically more formalities that you have to do, such as adopting bylaws. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Would there ever be a reason not to operate as a corporation? You see as sole proprietorship and partnerships. I unfortunately can't speak to Canadian law on this, but for the reason to not operate as a corporation in the U.S. is, well, as a C corporation, you're going to get hit with double taxation. You're going to be taxed at the corporate level, and when you distribute income to your company, you're also going to be taxed at that level. And that's going to be taxed differently based on whether it's salary that's being paid to you or if it's a dividend that's being paid out to you. But that's why most companies don't go to the corporate model. Companies of this size, the corporate model is more reserved for larger companies and companies that are taking on the private equity that we talked about earlier. For the S corporation, the primary reason is going to be just the additional formalities involved, the additional costs involved. In some states, you might have an additional tax involved, and you want to avoid that. The best thing you can do when making this decision on an entity type, talk to a CPA and an attorney. The CPAs look at everything from a tax standpoint. The attorney looks at everything from a legal structure standpoint, and that's going to help you guide that decision. And as a default, go with an LLC.
You have that in Canada?
You guys have I think you guys have the something similar to the LLC in Canada. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a similar entity type, and it has a similar type of liability protection, as I understand it, and pass-through taxation. And what I mean by pass-through taxation is, in a corporation, like I said earlier, the corporation is going to actually pay a tax. For an LLC and an S corp, your income is actually going to pass right through the business entity and go to the individual owners of the company, and you're going to be taxed at that individual level. Registration with foreign jurisdictions, if you're going to be doing a substantial amount of business outside of the state, you should register in that state's, with that state's Secretary of State. With breweries, it's not often a huge issue, except for if maybe you open a pub in another state or something like that. You should definitely register in that state. If you're just distributing into another state, you don't need to. Assume business name registrations. In most states, you can call your company whatever you want to call it, any LLC or corporation name, and then you can register a trade name that's what you're going to be slapping on your bottles and putting on the front of your pub, and that's the name that you're going to do business under. The minute book, I just want to mention that because it's one of those formalities that a lot of people overlook. And a corporate minute book is simply a book that has all of your corporate documents in it, and then it has all the formal decisions made by the owners of the company and the managers of the company. And if you're making major decisions in the company, things like changing the type of business you do, or making a major purchase, or firing somebody, like one of your managers, something like that, you should be documenting those decisions and signing them as the owners, and making sure those that the people with enough authority to make that decision are signing those resolutions. That does two things. One, it shows that you guys voted on it, and there's not going to be a dispute among the ownership that you made that decision. The other is that if you're ever sued for something, it helps to show that you're acting like a company, and that becomes really important for liability protection. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, assuming I don't spend 15 minutes on each slide. Okay. So let's talk about ownership agreements.
This is my favorite topic.
This is a big topic, and anybody who's been in business for a long time will tell you how, or has ever been in business really, and has had any issue come up. It's often an issue with an operating agreement or a shareholder agreement, and that's because this is the nuts and bolts of your business. This is what's going to determine management of your business, and very importantly, it's going to determine how you change ownership in the business. So when you go to sell your ownership or issue ownership to somebody else, or if you die or become disabled, bankrupt, divorced, any of these life events, your operating agreement is going to show you what happens. And there are a lot of horror stories out there about what happens if you don't have a proper operating agreement in place. I spent an entire year of my career working with a company through a shareholder dispute where there were 50-50 owners, and they did not have a proper operating agreement in place, and it took a year to disentangle them from one another, and a lot of curse words and threatened litigation and arbitrators and a lot of attorney fees. I can tell you that. Do you have any horror stories you want to share?
Yeah, we didn't have an operating agreement when I started my first brewery with my partner, and then when I decided to leave, there was no agreement on how much I was going to get paid. There was no agreement on really anything to work with. So as a result, what you'll find under tonight's lecture slides is an example of an operating agreement that you all could use. So you'll see the kinds of things that should be addressed for exit strategies, for any time one of the partners wants to leave or wants to sell out, or someone might have a different idea of what direction to head with the business. Well, that can all be addressed in an operating agreement with like how things would end and how you're going to operate from day to day.
Exactly, and it's, I get a lot of, in fact, I met with a client today who said, I think we're just going to put together our own operating agreement, and that's, that's fine. People do it all the time. You can pull one off of LegalZoom or use a sample off of Google, but these are extremely important agreements, and they should be negotiated among the owners, and they should be considered very carefully by the owners, and they should be drafted very well. Every business, I tell a lot of clients this, every business at some point in its lifespan is going to experience a change of ownership or a dissolution or a bankruptcy. Those are the three things that are going to happen at some point in the business. It may not be for 50 years, it may not be until you pass away, but at some point it's going to happen, and these agreements become extremely relevant. Other things that you'll find in these are how are your profits going to be distributed? Once you actually start making money, which is hopefully very soon, how are you going to spend that money? Are you allowed to just put it in cash reserves, or do you have to distribute it to your members? Especially if you're going to have passive investors involved in your company, they're going to be very concerned about that provision. And they're just going to be concerned about the operating agreement altogether, because these are people who don't have voting rights within your company generally. They're not going to have strong voting rights, at least. So they're going to want to make sure that they are secured by that agreement and that their rights are in place. I think we can move on from that. chat a little bit about securities law. I'm not going to get into this very much because it's a very deep area of law. It's a very risky area of law. If you don't do it right, it can have a lot of complications. But it's one of those things where there are different ways of doing it right, and it can be. I've talked to clients before who have gone attorney surfing looking for somebody to do their securities work, and they've been quoted with like 30 or 40 grand just to get their company off the ground in securities compliance. It's very complicated stuff. And by securities, what I mean is it's basically any type of ownership or investment in a company. So if you are purchasing equity in a company, you're buying a security. If you are loaning money to a company on a promissory note, that is technically a security. Anything that you as an investor are doing that gives you some kind of payback based on the success of the company, that's going to be a security. But in general, securities have to be registered. The overriding law is that a security has to be registered. By registered, I mean like a public company. When it goes public, it registers its IPO, and you can buy it off of one of the exchanges. But the government has realized that not everybody can afford to pay attorneys tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to register their company. So they've created all these exemptions to the securities law. And what you're going to want to do if you're starting a smallish, and by small I mean like about under $1 million or so, brewery or cidery or distillery, you're going to want to make sure that you fall within one of those exemptions. They are not that difficult to fall under, but there are some traps you can fall into. Like one is called, you're not allowed to perform what's called general solicitation. You cannot go on the internet and post on a website, hey, we're looking for money. Get in touch with us because we've got this great brewery we're putting together and we're selling shares, and we're selling for the 10 grand, you can buy a share of our brewery. That's called general solicitation or advertisement, and that's a big no-no under these exemptions. Where most people find their comfort zone in securities law is with friends and family. So you're bringing your friends and family together, and people are going to chip in some money to start your business. A lot of people think there's kind of a misconception out there that there's a thing called the friends and family exemption to securities law. There is no friends and family exemption. Just because mom, pa, and your best friend from high school are the ones investing in your company, technically you still have to comply with securities laws. Compliance isn't super nasty when you're a small business. The government has recognized that you can't, as a startup, you can't afford to put all of your money into complying with securities laws. So there's kind of a sliding scale on what you need to do. What I generally do with my companies is we prepare an investor packet that has the wonderful business plan that you guys are coming up with in this class. We put in there the operating agreement, and we put in there a disclosure statement that says all the risks that investor is going to run into in joining this brewery or joining this beverage company. And the risks are many. And the message we want to get across is basically you could lose every penny you put into this company. If your investor understands that, you're in pretty good shape, because what you're trying to prevent here is somebody who your business doesn't do as well as you expect it to. Somebody loses money and they decide to sue you and get their money back. And they claim that you misrepresented something or that you didn't give them the full story. You want to be able to say, hey, I told you, you might lose all your money you put into this business. It's important stuff because not only is there securities law, the regulations you have to follow, there's this whole idea of securities fraud where somebody can sue you for misrepresentations and things like that. It's important stuff. Talk to an attorney about it. If an attorney is asking too much money for what you're trying to do, talk to another attorney. There are different ways to handle securities law. Talk to people until you find the right fit for it. And you asked, where's the best reference for securities law for the layman? I would check with, you can go to the SEC website, but the best, and that's the Securities Exchange Commission, that's the federal securities law website. But I'd say the best resource is probably go to your state's Securities Commission. Go to your state's website, do a search for your state and securities. You'll find a website and it'll have all the basics for your state. That said, that'll give you a good basis, but if you're dealing with investors from other states, you have to comply with their state's securities laws as well. So just be wary of that. As far as who should invest, we talked about the friends and family deal. There are two basic types of investors that you can bring in. One is called an accredited investor. An accredited investor, they're great because the compliance threshold for them is much lower. Accredited investors are basically somebody who either has $1 million net worth, not including the value of their residence, or they make about 200 grand a year. Basically, our government has decided that if you're rich, you're obviously sophisticated in what you do with your money. I've found that to be very untrue in a lot of cases, but that's the assumption there. The other category is sophisticated investors, and that's basically people who they kind of know what they're doing. They know what they're getting into. They know how to manage their money. They're savvy in business, and they're not scrounging through their couch cushions looking for loose change to invest in your company. They're not draining their 401k to invest in your company. The people doing that kind of thing, tell them to invest in something else. It's not a good fit for you. But basically, the rule of thumb is the better you know somebody and the more money they have, the better the investor is going to be for you, the safer the investment is going to be for you. Move to the next one. Okay, taxes. First, a disclaimer, I am not a tax attorney. I don't enjoy tax issues, but they exist and they're an integral part of forming a business. We talked about the S Corp and LLC issue with the flow-through taxation. That's an important issue. Talk to your CPA or tax attorney about it. Another issue to be looking at, yeah, exactly, nobody enjoys tax issues. Another issue to look at is, especially if you're going to have some passive investors involved, you might want to set up what's called a tax distribution in your operating agreement for your company. There's a thing called phantom income, and it sounds really spooky, and it kind of is. The phantom income is where you're making money, so you're cash flow positive, you have money coming in, the money is flowing through the LLC or the S Corp to your individual members, but it's not actually getting there because you're going to stop it at the LLC level or the corporate level. You're going to pop it into a bank account that's going to be your cash reserves. Maybe you're trying to build up 100 grand in cash reserves before you start distributing money, income or something like that. So those profits are being recognized as profits by your members and by you, and they have to pay taxes on those profits, but they're not getting any money in distributions to pay those taxes. That's usually a bad situation for your investors, who basically are like, I thought we did this to make money, and I've just been paying taxes this whole time. So what you do is you set up in your operating agreement where the company has to distribute at least enough money, if it has to distribute enough money to pay everyone's taxes. So you distribute like 35% of profits, everybody has enough to pay the taxes, everybody's going home happy. Tax filings, you're going to file a form called SS4. Your CPA or attorney can do it, but you can do it too. It's a simple online form. If you do a search for IRS SS4, it'll pop up. You fill that out, send it in, they'll shoot right back to you what's called an employer identification number. That is your social security number for your business, essentially. It's what you're going to put on all your tax returns. It's what the bank's going to want to open a bank account. You're just going to need it. State employer registration, it's basically your tax ID for the state. Some states require that regardless. Some states say you don't really need a tax ID for the state until you start paying employees and withholding taxes and so forth. And for non-US, there's a question mark there because I have no idea. Not only am I not a tax attorney, I'm not an international tax attorney, but it's just like everybody else, you're just going to want to talk to a tax expert about that to lock all that down. name protection, this has become a massive issue in these industries, and there have been some really wonderful stories to come out of it, like the Russian River and Avery beer called Collaboration, Not Litigation. It's a wonderful story of two breweries who had a trademark dispute and ended up instead making a lovely beer and you know, singing Kumbaya. That is not normally how these things end. Usually it ends with bigger producer sending a cease and desist to smaller producer getting really angry and then deciding it's not worth their money to fight bigger producer, because these are expensive fights. They are they're very draining on somebody. They're very personal because this is the name that you've attached to your company or to your product. Avoid them, and the way to avoid them is by clearing your name and registering your trademark. Clear your name. It's becoming more difficult in that there are so many names out there for beverage companies and for products. It's becoming more and more difficult to find one that's not infringing on somebody, but there are also a lot of resources out there for you to do that research. Start with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Go to uspto.gov, look up the name that you're looking for, and you can do a basic search. It'll pull up anyone who's using that name or some combination of words in that name. And that's going to tell you if somebody else has registered a trademark in that name. If they have, and they're a beverage company, and it's still a live trademark, you're just probably not going to want to go down that road if it's anything close to it.
Could also be things like if you're a brew pub and there's already restaurants out there.
Exactly. Yeah. Wineries.
It's not just beverages.
Yeah.
Any beverage doesn't have to be beer. Any beverage is suspect.
Yep.
Other businesses that could be serving beverages.
Exactly. The test is likelihood of confusion. If there's some customer out there, some consumer out there who's going to see your product and associate it with somebody else's product, or vice versa, or see your name and associate it with somebody else's name, then that's called likelihood of confusion, and that's what's going to get you in trouble in the trademark world. The purpose of trademark registration is you can take that name, put it out into the world and say, I'm putting the world on notice that this is my name. That way, if anybody else tries to use that name, they should be able to do the same thing that you did. Do a search, find out that you're using that name, and they won't go down that road. And going back to name clearance, though, the PTO is one way to do it, but Google is also a wonderful resource for this. Run a Google search on your name, look at the first 20 pages of results and see if there's anything on there. There might be some that you think are a problem, don't turn out to be. It could be maybe some guy in 3 states over is homebrewing under that name. They have no intention of ever producing on a commercial level, but they have a little home brewery or a blog or something that they've named something. There are ways to deal with that. One is trademark your name. If you trademark your name and he hasn't yet, then you're going to probably have some superior rights to that person regardless. Also, with somebody who has a conflicting name and you think it might be something that you could still use, just contact them. Ask them straight up, are you using this name on a commercial level, or do you intend to? A lot of times they'll just let it go. And it's also, you'll get a feeling for what your risk is in that way. It's better to ask permission than forgiveness in that case, I would say. You trademark a name without having a legal business entity established first. Yes, you can. You can trademark a name under your own, you can register it under your own name. So you would be the registrant for the trademark. And then later on, if you want to, you can assign that trademark, that intellectual property over to your company. Does it require a lawyer to register a trademark? It does not. Anybody can go on the USPTO, file a trademark registration. That said, trademarks can be tricky. There are a lot of different types of trademarks, levels of trademark protection. There is a procedure that you have to go through in a lot of cases. There's for instance, there's a thing called the secondary registry, where if your name is a little too descriptive to be protected, such as, I don't know what a good example is, you call your beer, and you go to trademark it, they're going to say that's a little bit too descriptive because you're calling a beer a beer. We can't give you trademark protection on that, but we can put you on the secondary registry. Then if you build up some kind of what's called secondary meaning in that trademark, in that name, you can actually build trademark protection into your name. So say you go for 5 years, you've been using the name beer on your beer, and you're known throughout the land as being the brewer of the year. Maybe you can go back to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, present evidence that you have given additional meaning to that name that's related to your product, and maybe they'll put you on the principal registry. So there are a lot of factors that go into it. It's something you want to have done right. So maybe I'm biased in this, but I think it's probably best to have a lawyer do trademark registration. Domain name registration, I just put that on there simply to say, just do it. Get out there early, register your domain name. If somebody else already has it, again, it may not be the best name to use, but make sure to secure that early. Not only secure it, but hold on to it. I had a client recently who let their domain name lapse. Some squatter jumped in there, grabbed their website, and won't give it back. And it's caused, this is a website that had a lot of traffic going to it, and now somebody else is getting all of that traffic, and it's an unpleasant situation. Intellectual property issues, recipes. Maybe you want to protect your recipe. A lot of people don't. A lot of people will put their recipes on the internet. They don't care. I love that part. I love that kind of open source part of the beer industry. But a lot of people, that's understandably, that's your primary product. You want to protect what's going into that product. Recipes are not, you can't file a recipe. You can't get a trademark on them. You can't really get copyright protection on them because they are, it's not like a written piece. It's not like a written work. It's more like a formula. You can't get patents on a recipe. Where you can protect a recipe is through trade secrets law and through confidentiality agreements. If you don't want your brewers running off with your recipes when they go somewhere else or divulging them to somebody else, get them under an employment agreement with a confidentiality non-disclosure provision within it. That way, your recipes are maintained as confidential. The important part there is make sure that you keep them confidential. You lose the right of confidentiality when you start divulging that information to the public. So keep it tight. Inventions, not a huge issue in most of these industries, but if you come up with some cool new process that might be patentable or some new piece of equipment that might be patentable, that's worth talking to a patent attorney. Patents are extremely expensive to get, and you definitely don't want to try to do that yourself, but just something to keep in mind. And packaging, frankly, I don't remember why I put packaging up under intellectual property issues, but you can't get a whole lot of protection on the packaging itself because unless it's something really unique. If you have some kind of unique packaging you're using for all of your products, like some fancy shaped bottle or something like that, you can get trade dress protection, but not really. For the most part, that's going to be difficult to get. And label designs and logos, you can get trademark protection on those. I'd say the best place to start was with trademarking your name. If your name is of the type that you can't get primary registry, principal registry protection for that name, a nice alternative is to get trademark protection on the logo itself. So the design of your logo, which has your name in it, at least get that trademarked, and that's going to give you some protection from somebody else using a very similar logo. And even if you have your name trademarked, go ahead and get your logo. You can get your logo trademarked, and if it's something really unique you want to protect, that'll keep other people from copying off of that. But yeah, you can do that.
I was going to mention that if you look up Dogfish on the trademark site, you'll see some of their inventions.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they have funny names. Dogfish has a filter with a name. They've made a special filter.
The Randall? Yeah.
They have that
They
trademark.
have that trademark.
So I was looking,
Didn't
it's
know
like,
that.
what is this weird thing with all the Dogfish brands? It was like this filter.
If you've never been to the pub in Rehoboth Beach, check it out sometime. The Randall's pretty cool, and it's you get the Dogfish 90 running through it. It is delicious. And one more thing about trademark registration: once you've registered your trademark, the important part is to police that trademark. If you don't actively police your trademark and other people start using it, using something similar, and you do nothing about it, you can start to lose your rights to that trademark. And that's why you see it. One thing that's going on in this industry quite a bit is there's policing going on, but it's kind of like the good cop policing, where somebody will say, okay, you're infringing on my mark. I think this is close to what we're doing, but let's work something out here. Like let's get a deal together where you can use this kind of similar mark for the next 5 years, or you'll pay me a penny royalty or something like that per year. Something to just show that, okay, I'm doing my job in policing my trademark, but I'm also not being just that guy. I'm not being the corporate hound who's going around and trying to shut down everybody who's doing something anywhere similar to what I'm doing. Because some breweries have gotten bad reputations for what they're doing with their trademark policing, and I understand why they do it. They have to do it, but it's seen as kind of an aggressive move in these industries. The most interesting one is the side note. I don't know if you've heard about this one, but Left Hand Brewing is trying to trademark nitro. Yes, I'm not going to make any commentary on that, but it is an interesting move by Left Hand, and there definitely has been some commentary within the industry.
Yeah, I'm sure that's making a lot of friends there.
They caught the attention of Anheuser-Busch, as a matter of fact. Yeah. Alternative arrangements. The two big ones are contract brewing and alternating proprietorships. Like I said earlier, these are becoming very popular arrangements. Contract brewing works great for people who are trying to get going in the industry, maybe don't have the capacity that they need to make all the beer that they need to make. Maybe they want to contract brew for another region. Say you're a brewery in Colorado and you want to contract brew in Asheville, North Carolina. You can make an arrangement where somebody else is brewing your beer for you, and it's there's a little bit of a stigma attached to it in the industry. I don't know that that's my opinion on that is I don't know why. It's a perfectly legitimate arrangement. If it makes the same quality of beer, who cares? And they work really well because you can use somebody else's excess capacity and resources and equipment to make beer for yourself. One arrangement that I've seen pop up every now and then that we've done a few on is where you don't have a brewing facility at all. You contract brew everything you make, and you aren't technically brewing any of your own beer, and you are technically not a brewery, but you can still have somebody else make the product, and then you can sell the product. It works differently in different states. In the state of Oregon, if you get a distributor license, you can have somebody contract brew for you, and you can then sell that beer as a distributor, but under your own label. Under contract brewing arrangements, the contract brewer is going to be the licensed producer. They're going to pay the taxes. They're going to supply the equipment. They are going to file COLAs for your label approvals. You are basically just buying a finished product and reselling a finished product, or maybe consuming it, who knows. The alternating proprietorship is a little bit different. It's a very highly used structure in the wine industry, but it's definitely making its way through the brewing industry as well. A lot of the big brewers do this kind of arrangement. One of our guests in the 404 section is a woman who's the regulatory manager for Craft Brewer Alliance, and she was telling me how many alternating proprietorships they do. It's a lot, and they make a lot of beer through these things. The difference between that and a contract brewing arrangement is they are two licensed facilities operating under the same roof and using the same equipment. They're alternating the use of that equipment. They can alternate the use of other resources such as employees even. But what they're not going to alternate is space. Each brewer, each supplier is going to have its own space to put its product in. The TTB likes to keep those spaces very distinct, make sure that the tax paid and tax unpaid product is kept very separate from one another. They're going to use their own raw ingredients, but otherwise they're sharing all these resources. It's also created the ability to do the gypsy brewing type structure where maybe you don't have a brewing facility, but you can go in and set up an alternating proprietorship with another brewery, use their facility, make a bunch of beer, sell it under your own label as a licensed brewery, and go elsewhere. I think Mikkeller, this is a contract, right? I think
Yeah,
it's contract.
Mikkeller, the famous Danish brewery, he has all of his beer made in Belgium, at a Belgian brewery.
Yeah.
But some people are using this as a way to make cider in a brewery too.
Oh yeah, that is
If
true.
you want to make cider and beer, you have to do it as an alternating proprietorship because of the law, the legal differences between the two products.
I've not had the opportunity to do one of those yet, but I've heard that arrangement, and it's definitely becoming more popular.
So we're going to go a few minutes over because we had technical difficulties. So if people have to drop out, we're going to keep going for probably till 8:20 though. Thoughts on brewery co-ops?
Thoughts on brewery co-ops. There's a group here in Philly trying to start one. I love the idea. It's I've been waiting for somebody to open a brewery incubator in Portland for a long time. I think it's a great model. If anybody wants to do one, let me know. I'll help. I think that it's a great idea. It would probably have to be set up as an alternating proprietorship, and it's you have to check with your state's laws on whether they would allow that scale of alternating proprietorship. Because I'm guessing what you might be talking about is having maybe 6 different breweries in one facility, alternating the use of equipment, or maybe each has its own little pod with its own equipment. A lot of different ways to do it. But I think it's a great idea. I'd love to see more of these start up.
Well, there's that wine place doing it. 12 winemakers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They can share the equipment, but then they each store their product in a different part of the warehouse.
Yep. Yeah, and for wineries, it's a no-brainer. They're not using all that equipment year-round, so it makes complete sense. For other beverages, I think it still makes a lot of sense because if you don't have the funding to get into an operation that has like a 20-barrel brew system, and maybe you go in with a couple other people, and you guys do shared financing on it, or come up with some kind of arrangement that'll work, so you guys can share these resources.
Colin's asking how it actually works. Each of the individual parties have their own license or whatever corporation, and alternating applies over that.
For the I'm missing where that question is. Oh, okay, yeah. So for alternating proprietorships, yeah, each party is going to have its own corporate entity set up, completely distinct entities, and in most cases, completely distinct ownership and everything, and then they each get licensed within that facility. The TTB requires that each producer get certified through the TTB with a brewer's notice or whatever licensing they need to get, depending on what kind of producer they are. Each company has to be separately certified, and then the TTB also wants to approve that alternating proprietorship agreement. So you're actually going to submit that to the TTB. For the smaller suppliers, I don't think they give it a ton of scrutiny, but these agreements for the larger suppliers can come in under quite a bit of scrutiny.
What is the TTB?
The TTB is it used to be called the ATF. It's the taxing body for the alcohol industry. It's the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. There it is. I always just call it the TTB.
Yeah.
Those are the guys you're going to get.
The feds.
They're the feds,
Yes.
exactly. Those are the guys you're going to get. If you're a brewery, you're going to get a brewer's notice, which is this really extensive application process you go through. And you're going to tell them all about your business and down to like who you pay for your utilities. I mean, it's a pretty extensive application. And that's who you're going to pay your federal excise tax to. That's who you're going to pay your reports to. They're the ones who keep track of your production and whether you're paying your taxes.
I was just going to quickly, on Michael, on your question on contract brewing, the typical cost, we're gonna be working through the costs. So after 2 weeks, you'll see what the cost could be for different products, say, from an IPA down to a pale ale or some, even weaker, just the full range. Well, I'd say that they add 40 to 100% on top of that, depending on if it's your friends or not. That's what I've seen, 40 to 100% on top of that.
Real quick, I'll answer this incubator question. Can you set up an agreement so that one entity owns the equipment, resources, and has a financial stake in the other members? First of all, I'd say it depends on the state that you're in, but in general, that is how the first part of it, that is how an alternating proprietorship generally is going to work, where one company owns the equipment. They're called the host supplier, the host producer. They're going to basically rent that equipment out to the tenant producer. There's usually going to be that kind of hierarchy set up. And then one entity owns equipment and resource, has a financial stake in the other members. I don't think you can do within the I don't think the TTB would allow that because there's too much crossover between the entities. I've never dealt with that issue specifically. But I think I wonder though. I would have to think about that because that would be central to the incubator concept. Is incubators supplying these resources for these companies and in exchange probably taking equity in those companies. I would have to think about that, but it might be a possibility.
Question.
Yeah, it is a good question.
We probably should do one more slide.
The one more slide is just what's coming up in the other classes. A lot of things we didn't talk about today, like real estate, which is a huge issue for beverage companies, licensing, liability protection, insurance, financing, employment, distribution agreements. These are all other key components, just a little too much to go through in an hour.
Actually, we're gonna have a guy that's gonna discuss distribution agreements in last week. He's going to spend quite a bit of time on the contract because I've realized that can create huge problems. So we're starting early on that in this class.
Yeah,
a little new added bonus for you guys. You didn't think you had enough stuff to read.
Pay attention to that one. I do a lot of distribution work, and there's some massive issues that come up in that area. I'm dealing with one right now that's I love dealing with it because it's one of my favorite areas of the law, but the laws are crazy, and you need to pay attention to what those laws are before you start jumping into distribution. There's my email address. Feel free to use it. Drop me a question. I think we've set up a 1 or 2 question limit in the past, but it's never been an issue, so feel free to ask me anything. If you start asking too many questions, I might turn the clock on.
He's really busy.
But I'm always happy to talk about these companies, and I'd love to hear what your plan is, and yeah, feel free to contact me.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I know we've gone over it. Normally, we don't have this kind of trouble, but we'll be back in our normal studio next week in our director's chairs. Well, Marcus won't be here. We'll have Scott Ross, and he's with Rose City Labels, and he'll tell you everything you need. Scott Pillsbury. Scott Pillsbury. So he'll be telling us everything you need to know about labels, which is going to be really fun and beneficial. So get to work. A lot of stuff to do in this class. We pack it all in, and try not to fall behind because you'll find it's really hard to catch up. Great seeing you all, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks all. Cheers.
Cheers.